Welcome back to Hey Kentucky. It was the most unusual primary. In fact, almost a week later, we still don't even have the results, hopefully tomorrow. But to talk more about it, political science professor Dr. Stephen Voss from the University of Kentucky joins us. A friend of the program. Thanks for being back with us, Dr. Voss.
No, thanks for having me.
So there seemed to be a national perception that there was a bunch of voter suppression going on in Kentucky because there, were some long lines and there were only 2 polling locations, one in each of the major largest cities here. I want you to talk about that perception versus the reality, because the turnout really was pretty high.
2 things there. First, the turnout, completely irrelevant to how we handled the election. If you look around the country, turnout is rising everywhere. It rose even in the places with the worst administered elections. Okay, and for me as a professor, it bugs me to hear these people saying, look, turnout went up, everything must have worked. The turnout was going to go up either way. I don't think everything worked. That being said, the national fears about what went on in Kentucky completely missed the boat. If you looked at what the celebrities were tweeting about our voter suppression and the negative spin they were putting on Kentucky, it was Mitch McConnell is fixing this election for the Republicans. You can't trust the GOP, which was really silly because we were holding a Democratic primary. That was the main competitive race we had. To the extent Mitch McConnell had any dog in the hunt, he probably wanted fewer restrictions on voting, because that would mean a Booker victory, and he'd be better off facing Booker than McGrath.
So now that leads me to my question about this fall. Will we have more in-person voting places, do you think, or will absentee balloting be the wave of the future, I guess, the new normal?
So here's what was actually wrong with what we did. Kentucky gave a whole variety of ways to vote, but how we set up each one was set up in a way that usually helps empower wealthy people, helps empower more educated people, what we call as people of higher socioeconomic status, and usually discourages the vote by people who often aren't heard in American elections. The voting by mail process is really popular among educated professionals. They were going to vote anyway. It just makes their lives easier. They love it. It doesn't really bring into the electorate people of lower socioeconomic status, blue-collar workers, working-class people who aren't used to pushing paper across their desks in their day job. They prefer in-person voting. They prefer to vote on election day. That's what pulls them into the system. They also tend to decide late, and that means after the absentee ballot deadline was passed. Those were the people, for the most part, we saw piling into lines and waiting hours in Lexington, the people we saw banging on the door, trying to get in because the traffic was so bad in Louisville. Most of the choices we made really suppressed the vote among people of lower socioeconomic status. I do think we'll see some kind of attempt to repair that one way or the other come November, so that there are more options to vote in person, so people don't have to drive 10 miles across Louisville to actually exercise their franchise on Election Day. One way or the other, I think we'll see some changes there. The Secretary of State has indicated he's not on board with only a single centralized voting place for an entire giant county next time.
Do you think there will also be some changes or alterations made into the absentee ballot voting? Because you mentioned the timing of it. Charles Booker was surging, I suppose, the last 2 weeks leading up to the primary. Several people, I don't know how many, but dozens, hundreds, thousands had already cast their ballot before Booker really started making his voice heard.
That's right. When people lock in their votes early, it means you don't get the full election season, the full playing out of the battle between the candidates, which can undermine democracy. The good news for Booker, and the good news for us getting the Democratic candidate favored by the most registered Democrats, is Kentuckians apparently are procrastinators. We waited a really long time to send in those absentee ballots, and therefore most people probably got to pick the one they preferred soon before Election Day.
So you do anticipate, Dr. Voss, this fall there being additional in-person voting?
Yes, because the Secretary of State, Adams, has communicated, at least over Twitter, that he won't be tolerating that single voting location again. And as I've indicated, I'm strongly in favor of that. No matter what they do with keeping the absentee balloting or the other options, I'm strongly in favor of giving people choices that are closer to where they live and or work for voting, instead of making them cross densely populated counties over urban transportation networks. That's just a real barrier to voting. It's a form of accidental vote suppression, not what was being charged nationwide. But it's a rule that we know does have that effect, and we really shouldn't have it.
Dr. Voss, we will catch up with you once the election results are in and get your take as we move toward the general election in November. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
More Hey Kentucky right after this.